Hello and welcome to my channel Becoming Bev. I'm back in Fredericktown, Missouri today, back at our campground Fredric. I'm pretty excited. We're getting ready to have a couple of meetups here back to back. Johnny from the channel, Johnny's Journey, is doing a meetup here September 9th through the 11th. So that's a Friday through a Sunday. And then my meetup starts just the second that hers gets done. So my meetup is September the 11th through September 14th. We're pretty excited. I've got a band coming for my meetup. We've got a couple of contests and some giveaways. I think it's going to be a really fun time. I'll leave the information for both of those meetups in this video description. We still have a little bit of space. If any of you are interested in coming, just shoot us a text and let us know. The subject of today's video is the trip that I just returned from to Poland. So I feel like this video is a combination of beautiful places and a little touch of Polish history. So this trip was such a fun surprise for me. I had no idea Poland was so cool. Now, I don't consider myself a history buff at all, but I don't think you could visit Poland and not be drawn to the rich history. I'm going to apologize ahead of time for whatever mispronunciations I have. Some of these words are just so foreign to the way that I naturally speak, so I know that I'm going to butcher some of these. I'm going to apologize ahead of time, but I'm going to do my best. We began our trip in Warsaw, and I was fascinated just driving around with a mixture of old European architecture and new buildings. Poland does a great job with their public transportation. Near where I was staying, there was access to buses, the subway, trolleys, scooters, and even bicycles that you could rent. We did a tour of what was called the Best of Warsaw. The first stop was, here we go with starting to butcher the pronunciations. The first stop was Lazienki Park, also known as the Royal Baths Park, located in Warsaw's Central District. Belweder, maybe I'll just put the names of them up there and I won't even try to pronounce them. Anyway, the palace here was erected in 1660 and remodeled in the 1800s. We stopped at the Fredric Chopin Monument. There were musical benches there where you could press a button and hear Chopin's music play. Every summer in the summertime, they set up a piano and they have a recital there where people come and play Chopin's music. There are speakers set up all over the park and I imagine it's quite beautiful to hear. Chopin's statue has a stylized willow tree, which is supposed to look like a pianist's hands and fingers. We did a quick drive-by of some of the embassies, which featured some very unique architecture. One of the most beautiful things we saw was Lazienki Park with the Royal Lazienki residence. The palace on the Isle, which is now the Royal Lazienki Museum, was a summer residence for the king. The lake in front of it is man-made and held some fairly good-sized fish that were kind of mesmerizing to watch. Also, the peacocks on the grounds add a royal feel to the place. It's also known as the Palace on the Isle. It's now a museum and a park. I loved capturing the building's reflection on the water. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is dedicated to unknown soldiers who gave their lives for Poland. The changing of the guard takes place every hour, 365 days a year. Saxon Gardens is the oldest public park in the city, founded in the late 17th century, and it's just beyond the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. The fountain here is considered the center of Saxon Gardens and is often used as a meeting place for dating couples. We stopped at Hotel Bristol, and inside there's a wall with these little engraved circles with the names of famous people who had visited there. I got a kick out of seeing the one with ZZ Top on it. The Presidential Palace in Warsaw currently has a screen across the front of it. It's the official residence of the president, and it was originally built in 1643. We stopped by Old Town Marketplace. Many of the buildings here were destroyed in World War II, and when they rebuilt them, they used a mixture of materials, like whatever they could preserve from the rubble, and then new construction or new materials. So it's kind of a cool combination of both in these buildings. When we were going in and out of the churches, I noticed several of the Black MaDonna. It's considered a venerated icon here and has been associated with Poland for over 600 years. Located between Old Town and New Town is a really cool semicircular fortified outpost called Warsaw Barbican. It's part of the Old Town city walls, but it separates Old Town and New Town. Now, we noticed several memorials around Warsaw. They're there to commemorate places where battles or executions took place during the German occupation of the city during World War II. This particular one is called the Warsaw Uprising Poland Memorial, and I cried when I read it. It's right outside of a hospital. Here, doctors, nurses, and patients were murdered, and there are still bullet holes on the outside of the building as a reminder of what happened here. The plaque reads, "This place is sanctified by the blood of the Poles who died for the freedom of their homeland. On September 1st, 1944, the Germans murdered about 430 people in an insurgent hospital." We left Warsaw and headed out to visit an acquaintance from Houston, Amber, and her husband, Paul. If you watched my last video, I share their story about how they've opened their home to people fleeing the Ukraine. In my opinion, it was the most important part of this trip. If you haven't watched that video, please go back and check it out. It really took what's going on with the Ukrainian war out of the abstract and made it very real. We spent the night at an estate. I'll put the name up here. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. This estate was an interesting mixture of things. It had a palace that was built in the 14th century, a microbrewery, restaurants, donkeys, breeding horses, and Poland's only herd of American buffalo. Next, we visited Krakow. We stayed in a little luxury hotel called Bachleda, and I thought this was such a great deal. It's a little 5-star hotel for $169 a night. It was only a 10-minute walk from the square, and it felt really nice to get dressed up and have a fine dining experience. I don't think I've done that in a really, really long time. My only regret is that I waited until the last night to check out the spa. We toured the administrative building of the old steel mill, and I'm not even going to attempt this pronunciation. There are twin buildings built here in 1952 to 1955, and they represented the most exquisite example of socialist realism in Krakow. We went through the main lobby, offices, and massive conference rooms. They're perfectly preserved and look like the workers could just come back tomorrow and start working again. There's a labyrinth of underground passageways which connect the two buildings, and I was particularly enamored with the spiral staircases. There's an area of Krakow called Nowa Huta, or something like that, which was designed to be a communist utopia. For years, the Polish people were not allowed to build churches, but after many protests, they were given consent, but they weren't given any materials or equipment for the construction. So in 1967, they began building this church called the Ark of Lord Church. The church was built like a grassroots type movement, and the facade of the church is made up of all these small stones which people could pick up and carry to the construction project. And you can see there are thousands of them here. There are 8 small bells that hang at the entrance and play a song at the top of every hour. This church has kind of a mid-century modern feel to it, and the roof of the church looks like Noah's Ark. Now, I thought the crucifix inside was a pretty bold piece of art. It looks like Christ on a cross, but also it looks like he's about to fly into the heavens. I did this trip with my friends Louis and Stacy. Louis has Polish ancestors, which is why we chose to visit here. When Louis was 24, he and his twin brother changed their last name from Wojtyla to Woodhill. Now, Wojtyla is spelled W-O-J-T-Y-L-A. And they felt that it was too difficult for anybody to pronounce and spell. So as it turns out, Pope John Paul II's name originally was Karol Wojtyla, the same as Louis's last name before he changed it. So he and Louis apparently are related, and Louis speculates that they're third cousins. So we visited the childhood home of Pope John Paul II, and I suggested to Louis that every time he see a photo or a statue of the Pope, he should look at it and go, "Cousin!" I never quite convinced him to do that, but I thought it would be fun. And I definitely think there was a family resemblance between Louis and the Pope. Now, Karol Wojtyla, or Pope John Paul II, grew up in Wadowice in southern Poland, right next door to the parish church in the town square. Now, within walking distance of my hotel was the Wawel, spelling, Castle, which is known for its ornate tapestries that date back to the 1500s. The tapestries are made of wool strands, silk, and gold. And I love really cool ornate ceilings, and the castle did not disappoint when it came to the cool ceilings. Now, one of my favorite things that we toured was the Wieliczka salt mines. The mines opened in the 13th century and were in operation up until 2007. The salt is varying shades of gray and kind of reminds you of like unpolished granite or something. Now, its attractions include all these old shafts that were in the mines, and there's kind of just this labyrinth of passageways in there. We walked for a few hours and only saw about 1% of the mine. There are displays of historic salt mining equipment, an underground lake, chapels, and numerous statues carved out of rock salt by the miners. And even the chandeliers are made from salt crystals. We visited the Jewish Square, also known as the Jewish Ghetto. In 1941, the Jews were forcibly removed from their homes and relocated here. They were closed off from other parts of the city, and they were cut off and starving. The chance for survival once you got here was almost non-existent, and only about 10% of the Krakowian Jews survived the war, and a lot of them with the help of Oskar Schindler. So if you've seen the movie Schindler's List, it gives a history, you know, of kind of what happened in this area. Today, there's a very small population of Jews still living in Krakow, and they've revived their cultural identity within the city, and it's become a place of significance for them. Today, the square is flanked by iconic synagogues and old world restaurants and cafes. We also saw the square of empty chairs. Each chair represents 1,000 people who were taken to their deaths. It's, you know, it's difficult to talk about some of these. It's like, I don't want to skate by it and pretend like it's not something sad, it's not something significant. Like, I think it's terrible that things like that happened. And I also think that what we can do individually is our own part to see that nothing like that ever happens again. And when I say our own part, I mean if we can do the best we can to show love to people in our lives, because I feel like that's the biggest problem facing the world today, is the lack of love. Now, one of my favorite evenings on this trip, I just went out walking by myself. I stopped at an outdoor cafe in the square and I enjoyed a nice glass of wine. And I sat there in awe of the views and just felt incredibly blessed to get to have had this experience. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. A special thank you to my channel members and subscribers. You keep watching and I'll keep posting content, and I hope to see you here at the meetup.